So we're going to start. All right, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the American Legion Post 99, the Sons of the American Legion, I'd like to welcome you all to the 4th annual Post 99 American Legion High School Oratorical Scholarship Program. It is called a Constitutional Speech Contest. Just in case you don't know me, I'm Tony Coppola. I'm the high school history teacher for the Big Sky School District, and it's an honor to be here this evening as your MC. Before we start everything else, I would like to bring up Pastor Steve Anderson for the invocation. Good, yourself there. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for our blessings, to be citizens of a free country. We meet today, Father, to listen to some of the youth of our local high school regarding their thoughts and what they've come to believe or think about regarding the Constitution of the United States. We give Thee thanks, Father, for those who drafted this phenomenal document that has lived many centuries now, that is alive and breathing. We ask Thee, Father, to have us have an appreciation for the freedoms it affords us, the controls it tries to exercise on those who are to be our servants. We are grateful for its design and the inspiration of those in its drafting. The time they took to consider civilizations long past and to take the strengths and weakness and compensate for the weaknesses of a draft document that we are blessed with today. We thank Thee for our freedoms. Now, Father, we pray for these young people who will be speaking to us, that they'll be minimized with their anxiety, that they'll be clear in thought and process and be able to remember what it is they want to purport to us. We ask Thee to bless them and to help us to have an appreciation for the things they're coming to experience as young adults. For these things we give Thee thanks, and we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. All right, if you all rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Move your cover if you have any. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, you can be seated. Okay, so both the Sons of the American Legion and the Post are extremely honored to hold the 4th annual post-level contest here at the Warren Miller Performing Arts Center. We'd like to thank the school and the WAMPAC for hosting this contest. Today we have 5 contestants, and they will be joining us shortly. Before we get into that, I just have a few brief remarks about the program that I'd like to share. We Legionnaires are proud of our organization. We're particularly proud of our youth activities, which we feel offer much in the development of our country's young people. Few organizations can match the dimension of the Youth Service Program carried out by the American Legion under the direction of its National Commission. The American Legion High School Oratory Contest began sponsored by the 1938 by the American Legion. It is designed to instill in high school students a greater knowledge and appreciation of the Constitution. Other objectives include the development of leadership, the ability to think and speak clearly, and the preparation for the acceptance of the duties, responsibilities, and rights of American citizenship. To date, more than $3 million in scholarships have been awarded at the national level by the American Legion in this contest. 3 national finalists will receive up to $18,000, $16,000, and $14,000 respectively. In addition, contestants who win their state final contests, represent their state at the national contest, will receive $1,500 scholarships. So it's quite lucrative for those who move forward. Scholarships at the national level have totaled over $138,000 annually and are provided by the American Legion. So awards today for our ceremony will include cash prizes of $500 for first place, $300 for second, and $200 for third. Winners will also receive an American Legion medal donating their place in the post-level competition. And all participants will receive a certificate and then a post-99 American Legion action pin for today's competition. Okay, so now kind of the rules and regulations of today's competition. Each contestant must give a prepared oration on some aspect of the United States Constitution, giving emphasis to the duties and obligations of a citizen of his or her government. The oration must be at least 8 minutes, but no more than 10 minutes in length. Civic duty and the obligation of a U.S. citizen are outlined in the Constitution. The purpose of this competition, is to showcase the competitor's interpretation of that document and how the civic duties of each and every citizen can and will to continue to make America one of the greatest countries on earth. But before we bring our speaker out to speak, there's a few guidelines that I need to ask. First and foremost, you'll notice that the contestants are not at the auditorium at this time. Throughout the competition portion, they will appear only on stage, and then they will exit, and we will bring them out later. In all fairness to the contestants, I ask that you do not applaud. I know that sounds weird, but how it works is after they finish their speech, they will say thank you, and they will walk off. I know you want to say applaud, but just hold that urge. Okay? Please abide by this rule. And the reason why is as we go further into the competitions, that the district and the state, those are the rules that they abide by. I would ask that you would not take any pictures. Please do not leave your seat while a contestant is speaking. And if you need to leave the room, please exit house left or house right. Otherwise, you will not be permitted to re-enter until the speaker has completed. In addition, if you're carrying a cell phone, now is the time to turn that off. It is obviously our goal not to distract the speakers. They've all worked so hard, the last thing they need is a cell phone going off or a flash photography. Okay? Additionally, if you're sitting next to a judge, please do not disturb or call attention to that. Does everybody understand all that? Okay. So our speakers will also be introduced only by number. Prompting in any manner is not allowed. It may also result in disqualification. So each speaker is about to give an 8 to 10 minute prepared oration on some phase of the United States Constitution. They're not allowed to use notes. They're not allowed to stand at the podium. And they are not allowed to use a sound system. So they'll be based on their ability to project their voice. The contestants will be shown a time card by the gentleman down here. 8, 9, and 10 minutes will mark their oration. If they go over or under, they will have a penalty point, and that is outlined in the judge's card. There will be a short pause between each contestant to allow the judges time to mark their scorecards. Once each prepared oration has been completed, the judges will gather in the green room, and the tabulator will join them to tally up the scores. So, I would like to call contestant number 1 to the stage. Her oration is For Your Country.
Civic duty plays an important role in the United States. It has many ties to the Constitution and United States government. Civic duty allows the United States to be run effectively, and without it, the country would likely crumble. One of the main civic duties in the United States is voting, which is key for the government to be run properly. To vote responsibly, citizens need to be properly informed. Being an informed citizen is an extremely important civic duty in the U.S., as is serving in the military. All of these civic duties allow the United States to be a successful and powerful country. Voting has changed in many ways throughout the United States history. However, one thing about it has stayed the same: its importance. Voting has been an essential part of the United States since the very beginning. Before they were the United States, the colonies voted on Richard Henry Lee's motion to declare independence on July 2, 1776. 12 of the 13 colonies voted in favor of Lee's motion, with New York abstaining from the vote. This led to the colonies signing the Declaration of Independence and to the formation of the United States. After the United States were formed, voting became one of the most important civic duties and rights given to the citizens by the Constitution. At the time, though, only white males 21 years of age or older who owned property were allowed to vote. This was a huge problem because not everybody's voice was heard and many opinions could not be expressed simply because people were not allowed to vote. Many people were discriminated against and nothing was being done to change this because the people in power were not the ones being affected and because the process to amend the Constitution is quite a long one. Change finally started to happen in 1870 with the ratification of the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment declared that citizens cannot be denied the right to vote by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, many people were still being discriminated against. Women and Native Americans were still not allowed to vote, and many African Americans were unable to vote due to poll taxes, literary tests, fraud, and intimidation from other citizens. The next major change to voting came in 1920 with the 19th Amendment, which finally gave women the right to vote. 4 years later, Native Americans were also given the right to vote. The last major changes to voting came in 1964 and 1971 with the 24th and 26th Amendments. The 24th Amendment eliminated poll taxes nationwide, allowing poor farmers and less fortunate citizens to express their opinions and participate in our government. The 26th Amendment lowered the required voting age from 21 years old to the current voting age of 18 years old. Although many changes have been made to the Constitution to ensure the majority of the citizens living in the U.S. have the right to vote, many people choose not to vote. According to a Penn State study, in the 2016 presidential election, only about 58% of Americans actually voted. This means that about 42% of the voting eligible population decided not to vote. Many people who did not vote did so because they felt that their vote didn't matter or that it wouldn't make a difference. Many citizens that feel this way don't vote, and voting is an essential part of our government. Voting determines what laws and policies are enacted and affect the lives of all U.S. citizens. Voting also determines who represents and gets to be the face of the United States to the outside world. Congress even votes on whether or not the United States goes to war with another country. Even if people do vote, the success of our country is not guaranteed. To vote responsibly, citizens need to be properly informed about the candidates, policies, and laws that they are voting for. Being aware and informed is an extremely important civic duty in the U.S. It is many ties to the Constitution. The First Amendment to the Constitution states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This amendment mentions two very important rights, freedom of speech and freedom of press. Both of these freedoms allow citizens to inform others and become informed by listening to others and reading what others have written. This may make it seem easy for citizens to become informed, but it's actually a lot harder than it seems. Both propaganda and fake news make it difficult for citizens to become informed. Propaganda, according to the Webster Dictionary, are ideas or statements that are often false or exaggerated, that are spread in order to help a cause, political leader, or a government. One of the main times propaganda is used is during wars. During World War II, the United States government, with the help of the media, spread propaganda about Germany and the Axis powers all across the nation. Propaganda rallied people to the cause, and many posters encouraged people to enlist in the armed forces and to buy war bonds. Propaganda mainly exaggerates certain ideas, but some stories found online today can simply be lies. One of the main sources of misinformation today is called fake news. Fake news, according to the Cambridge English Dictionary, are stories that appear to be real news, spread using the internet or other forms of media, usually created to influence political views or as a joke. The problem with these fake stories is that they make it difficult for citizens to distinguish between what information is fake and what is factual. Even if citizens can distinguish make this distinguish between correct information and incorrect information. There's so many fake stories out there that can be difficult to find a reliable source with plenty of information on a topic. This is what can make this civic duty so hard to fulfill. Although this civic duty is difficult to fulfill, it's extremely important that citizens strive to fulfill it. By being informed, citizens can vote on laws and policies that improve life in the United States for all citizens. They can also stop corruption from taking root in the government by being aware. By being informed, citizens can decide how they want to help improve the United States. And one way is by serving in the military. Becoming a member of the armed forces is one of the greatest civic duties a citizen can fulfill. Whether they're part of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, or another branch of the military, they are fulfilling their civic duty of protecting the United States. The Constitution grants Congress the right to raise and support an army and to provide and maintain a navy in Article 1, Section 8. In the same section, in Clause 11, Congress is granted the power to declare war. Although Congress can declare war, the President is named Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Throughout the United States history, there has mainly been one big change to military service. From 1940 to 1973, there was a military draft. A draft, according to the Cambridge English Dictionary, is the process by which people are ordered by law to become members of the armed forces. In January 1973, the United States draft was ended. At the time, there were about 2.2 million people serving in the armed forces. After the draft was ended, the United States Armed Forces moved to an all-volunteer military force. Today, this is how people become members of the armed forces, by volunteering. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, there are about 2.15 million people currently serving in the United States Armed Forces. This civic duty is one of the hardest for citizens to commit to, but it's extremely important that citizens do commit to it. Without people serving, there would be no way to protect the United States or the citizens in it from outside threats and harm. The people that serve are extremely brave and selfless. I cannot thank them enough for their service. All of the civic duties I have mentioned are essential to the success of the United States. Voting, being informed, and serving in the military all affect our lives every day, even if we may not realize it. Voting has changed the United States in many ways that still impact our lives today. By being informed, citizens have improved our country time and time again. And by serving in the military, citizens have protected our country from harm numerous times, allowing future generations to prosper. And with everyone doing their civic duties in the U.S., there is nothing our country cannot overcome. And as John F. Kennedy once said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Thank you.
Okay, judges, contestant one's time was 9 minutes and 50 seconds. There is no penalty. Judges, are we all set? All right, ladies and gentlemen, contestant number 2, the title of her oration is The Birth Lottery.
You won the birth lottery, that's for sure. A phrase my dad says to me, at least weekly. I never really thought anything of it until I began writing this speech. It really got me thinking. How did I win the birth lottery? Why am I so lucky to live in the United States? My life in another country wouldn't be so different, now would it? And for some reason, as I contemplated the meaning of this simple phrase, I began thinking about fear. Nyctophobia is a severe fear of the dark. The dark is my greatest fear. Well, not necessarily the darkness itself, but rather what lies within the darkness. And as much as I hate the dark, I can't even begin to explain how thankful I am that the dark is the thing that I am most afraid of. A teenager living in Syria was once asked what scares her. Her response was, to be injured from explosions and have to stay in bed. I worry about the death of my family and then being alone, plus darkness. Now we're both scared of the dark, aren't we? How different can we really be? The difference is that the dark I fear comes from turning the lamp next to my bed off when I want to go to sleep. The darkness she is afraid of is the darkness she'd experience if she ever lost her entire family and ended up alone. The next question she was asked was, what is your dream? Now, before I read her response, I began thinking about what my answer would be. I would have said something along the lines of, well, hopefully I'll get into my dream college and then pursue whatever career I decide on during my years at university. A comfortable answer, but it's true. Comfort. Comfort is all I've ever known, and frankly, I can't imagine anything different. Then I read her answer. Her response was to see peace in our city. Really, I'd like to go and live in a peaceful country where there is no war. I'd like to go and live in a peaceful country. The comfort she dreams of is the comfort I live in every single day. I've never had to worry about violence in my community. I have never witnessed anyone get shot. I have never even seen a bomb in person. The only injury I ever really worry about getting is from playing volleyball or skiing. When I look out my window, I see nothing but peace and serenity in my small town. So, what's the difference between living in the United States and living in Syria? The simplest answer is freedom. The word freedom is defined as the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. There are countless freedoms that Americans take for granted every single day. One crucial right that Americans enjoy, but often take for granted, is the right to vote. In the East African country of Eritrea, you are only allowed to vote at a local level, and ever since they gained their independence in 1993, they are still unable to vote at a federal level. In the United States, the government essentially relies on voting. The 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution granted African American men the right to vote, even though many loopholes were created to prevent them from exercising this right for nearly 100 years. Those included literacy tests, poll taxes, etc. The 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, granted women the right to vote. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes, which had been a significant obstacle for African Americans who wished to cast their ballot. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 eliminated all of the other barriers that stood in between African Americans and their right to vote. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. According to the United States Census Bureau, only 22.8% of the United States population is under the age of 18. This means that the other 77.2% of American citizens are able to register to vote. However, in 2016, only about 61.4% of those that are of the voting age in the United States reported casting their vote. Why not 100%? According to the IFES election guide, in Belgium's 2014 election, over 87% of their citizens cast their vote. In Australia, they are legally required to vote, otherwise they'll have to pay a fine. In their 2016 election, 91% of their citizens had voted. That was the lowest voter turnout they had seen since they introduced their modern voting system in 1924. Aspiring Australian politicians have to work to appeal to the entire nation rather just members of their own party. That focuses Australians to focus more on policy rather than party. In the United States, politicians focus almost solely on party, and along with the spoiler effect. What is the spoiler effect? The spoiler effect occurs when one candidate essentially steals votes away from another candidate, paving the way for a different candidate to win. Take Ralph Nader in the 2000 presidential election, for example. In Florida, almost 100,000 people cast their vote for the independent candidate, Ralph Nader. Think of if instead they had cast their vote towards the Democratic candidate, Al Gore. He may have swayed the Electoral College vote in Florida, which may have even secured him the presidency over George W. Bush. American politicians focus way too much on party rather than trying to win the votes of those that don't belong to a party. Personally, I won't be eligible to vote for about 2.5 more years. This means that I have time to figure out exactly what I look for in a candidate for whatever election I'm voting for. It means that I have time to figure out which political party I belong to or don't belong to. It means that I can figure out if I want to be the one running and being voted on. If voting is the way that I can show that I am thankful, that the dark is my greatest fear, then why not vote? The 9th Amendment to the United States Constitution protects your rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution. This includes your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a phrase I'm sure you've heard before. But what does it truly mean? The right to life is a moral principle that states that every human being has the right to live, and it, in particular, should not be killed by another human being. The right to liberty is essentially your right to freedom. The only limitation, you're allowed to pursue your own will, but you cannot break any of the laws written in the Constitution. The pursuit of happiness grants you the right to pursue what makes you happy, to build your own life. And similar to your right to liberty, the only limitation is that you cannot violate any of the laws already outlined by the Constitution. In my opinion, the pursuit of happiness is one of the most important rights that we enjoy every single day as American citizens. It gives me the right to choose my own career, to choose my own path, to build my own life and do what makes me happy. It gives me the right to pursue my own dreams, no matter how big they are. You won the birth lottery. That's for sure. What does it mean? Well, it means that I don't constantly worry about my own safety. It means that I am not constantly scared of bombing or war. It means that I'm not constantly scared of losing my loved ones due to the civil unrest within my country. It means that I have a voice. It means that I am free. Thank you.
Okay, judges, contestant 2 out of time, 8 minutes, 12 seconds. There is no penalty. judges, are we ready? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome contestant number 3 to the stage. The title of his oration is The Price of Freedom.
In 1776, after 6.5 brutal years of fighting, the American colonies gained their independence. Quickly, the Founding Fathers made a decision. Instead of succumbing to the tyrannous monarchy instilled by Great Britain, they determined that the people of the new republic could govern themselves. Each of the authors of the Constitution, the heroes of our country, trusted each of us. And they trusted each of the future generations to uphold the tenets of democracy and to preserve their vision. Thomas Jefferson understood the burden to which they just thrust on the American people when he said the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. They understood then that for this crazy, new, vulnerable idea to work, preservation would be a civic duty. And the most effective way of preservation would be through voting. The way in which citizens can directly access and make their opinions known to their government. I'd like to convince you of something. Right now, we're in the midst of a constitutional crisis. We have endured similar crises throughout history, and I truly believe we can overcome it. But we must re-inspire our citizens in order for our democracy to endure. Citizenship has always been a central part of American history. And now, with voter turnout lower than ever before, it's crucial that we continue to keep it a central part of our lives. Today, the United States has a system of voting that is almost entirely fair and inclusive. However, this was not the case for a significant amount of American history, and several hindrances of freedom had to be abolished throughout. The 15th Amendment, ratified by the states in 1870, states that the right of citizens of the United States to vote should not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This amendment should have quickly removed many voter restrictions and made voting across America relatively unrestricted. However, this was not the case. Many states quickly began to initiate restrictive measures such as poll taxes and literacy tests in an attempt to re-exclude many minorities, especially African Americans. But states found many whites, especially those who were poor and uneducated, as collateral damage of their restrictions. And so, in 1898, Louisiana became the first of 7 states to pass the Grandfather Clause, offering exemptions to those who voted before 1867 or who had fathers or grandfathers who voted before 1867. Now, voting for African Americans was illegal before that year, and so none of these exemptions applied, and many southern states quickly found an effective way of racial disclusion at the voting polls. A fundamental truth of American democracy comes from the Declaration of Independence, in that all men are created equal. But this fundamental truth was not the case at the time. And from the Grandfather Clause sprung Jim Crow laws and region-wide segregation that lasted into the 1960s. Finally, in 1915, the Gwynne versus United States Supreme Court case deemed the Grandfather Clause and other means of voting restrictions unconstitutional. But even so, less than half of the American population was even eligible to vote. Not until 1920, with the passage of the 19th Amendment, were women allowed to vote across the country after a 70-year struggle for equality. And even so, restrictions on groups such as Native Americans lasted into the 1950s. Even today, with the spread of fake news and hacking of United States elections, we experience another barrier of freedom in the voting system. Outside sources meddle with the susceptible minds of American people. And today isn't perfect, so we must continue to fight for our freedoms and liberties. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Today, even with absentee ballots and early voting making casting a vote across the United States easier than ever, voter numbers have plummeted throughout the last century. In reality, voting in the United States is relatively pathetic. In a recent study by the Pew Research Center, the United States ranked 31st out of 35 countries based on 2012 voter turnout. The study determined that just 53% of eligible voters, just 41% of the American population at the time, cast a ballot. How is the whole of our country expected to be represented when only 41% is being heard at the polls? A fundamental tenet of American democracy is that the voices and opinions of all citizens should be heard, and currently, 59% is silent. Even worse, this trend is not being represented internationally. The same Pew study concluded that countries like Belgium, Turkey, and Sweden have consistently had voter turnout above 80%. Many of the reasons for the lack of turnout are unclear. However, one finding is that states with uncompetitive races have the lowest turnouts. West Virginia, with the nation's second lowest 2012 voter turnout at just 46%, has convincingly voted Republican for 5 straight presidential elections. Hawaii, with the nation's lowest 2012 voter turnout at just 44%, has voted landslide Democrat 8 elections in a row. The craziest number to me, 47 million people. That's how many people voted in 2012 and refused to vote in 2014. And a lack of voting has not always been the case in American history either. For the 60-year period between 1840 and 1900, presidential voter turnout in the United States was upwards of 70% every year. And in this decline, American democracy is dying. Democracy is defined as a system of government run by the whole population. The whole population, not 41%. Signs of recovery are present. In the 2018 midterm, a recent study by NPR shows that the midterm numbers were at 47% for eligible voters, the highest voter turnout since 1966, up 12% from 2014. But what do these spikes in percentage actually mean? Are we truly becoming better citizens of this country? Or are this country's strong divides and burning rage fueling the turnout? One of the best ways to revive voting nationwide is to install a voting culture in my generation. Currently, only 2 in 5 18 to 29-year-olds cast a ballot in a presidential election, while over 60% of people over 30 participate. To some, their vote may seem incredibly insignificant. After all, the chance of my vote actually affecting the outcome of a presidential election, 1 in 60 million. I'm more likely to win the lottery twice in the same day. But the probability of affecting election, or the chance of my vote actually affecting my candidate, should not be the driving force of voter turnout. Because what this country stands for and what the Constitution protects is incredibly significant. Without it, we would lose the freedom of speech, peaceful protest, religion, the press, all freedoms we enjoy today, often without fully realizing them. So it's important to educate my generation on the history and importance of citizenship and why it still is at the heart of the American system. So try. After leaving here today, I hope my words have implored you to make a difference. Honor our founders and preserve their visions of democracy by voting, encouraging those around you to do the same. Because we cannot simply wait while the tenets of our country crash down among us and our ideals cease to exist. Reflect and think about what you have living in the United States, and be vigilant and informed, for that is the price of freedom. Thank you.
Judges, contestant number 3's speech was 9 minutes and 7 seconds. There is no penalties. Judges, are we all set? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome contestant number 4 to the stage. The title of his oration is Responsibilities.
Every year on my birthday, my dad asks me a couple of questions. The first question that he asks me is a joke. He'll say, "Now that you're 6, or whatever age I am, do you feel any different?" Knowing that I don't actually feel any different, he asks this question just to see my reaction. And every year, I roll my eyes and try not to show my smile at this repeating joke. The other question that he asks me is more serious. He'll say, "Now that you're 6, you know you're going to have a lot more responsibility, right?" And every year I respond, "I know, Dad." These 3 words carry both hope and anxiety. You see, the word responsibility carries a lot of weight with it, even when you're 6. It means people are counting on you and you cannot let them down. It means people are trusting you and believe that you are capable of said responsibility. Now, the obligations my dad was talking about were small things like feeding the dogs or setting the table. They were nothing like the obligations that we have as citizens of the United States. The responsibilities that we have as citizens are substantially bigger than those of a 6-year-old. For example, we have the duty to pay our taxes for safer roads and better schools, vote for our leaders to create good policies, and if needed, enlist an army and defend our country at war. These civil duties, engagements, and responsibilities are some of the most important things that we do for our country. On April 15th, Americans across the country roll their eyes. Not because they heard my dad's joke, but because they know it's tax day. Americans give anywhere from 10 to 37% of their income to the government, and the government uses this money to pay for public services. Some could argue that the birth of our country is based around the animosity of taxes. These Sons of Liberty dumped millions of dollars worth of tea into the Boston Harbor just to protest taxation without representation. In the infancy of our nation, citizens did not pay taxes. Instead, our government used tariffs to create revenue. Unfortunately, these tariffs did not amount to enough to pay for the Civil War. That is when Abraham Lincoln enacted the first income tax. He used this tax to help pay for the war. Although the 16th Amendment, which allowed the government to impose income tax, was not ratified until after the Civil War, our country fulfilled their responsibility and came together. It wasn't until 1913 that the Congress ratified the 16th Amendment and income tax started to become what it is today. Citizens pay a portion of their income to the government, and Congress decides what that money will be spent on. Depending on how you feel Congress spends your tax dollars, taxes can either be a good thing or a bad thing. I remember the first time I had to pay income tax. I got my first paycheck and I was ecstatic. I looked the complicated paper up and down to see how much money I earned. And when I noticed there was a portion subtracted, I was not angry. I was not angry because I knew that money was going to the government and it only amounted to a little money. The one issue I did have was I had no say in how that government would be spent. I had absolutely no power. It could be spent on war, public education, or even building a wall on the Mexican-American border. I had no say because I'm not old enough to vote. This led me to wonder, do Americans really hate paying their taxes? A study by marketplace.org shows that Americans do not mind paying their taxes if they agree with how Congress spends that money. If they agree with how their elected officials spends that money, then they will have no problem giving the government some of their income. And that is just one reason why voting in this country matters so much. Voting may seem like one of our most basic rights. Although it is basic now, it has not always been so fundamental. Our forefathers excluded the right to vote from our original Constitution because it was a controversial topic during that time. Different states had different policies about who could vote, and in order to incorporate the right to vote in our Constitution, we needed to solve the issues of slavery. Originally, citizens were only allowed to vote for the House of Representatives. It seems ludicrous that a country based on democracy would exclude the right to vote from our most important document. After nearly a century, Congress passed the 15th Amendment, allowing all citizens to vote despite race, color, or previous servitude. All citizens, that is, except women. It took another 50 years for women's suffrage to prevail, and in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women the right to vote. After nearly a century and a half of our ancestors fighting to make voting a basic right, a significant portion of citizens today take it for granted. According to the Census Bureau, only about 60% of eligible voters voted in the 2016 presidential election, and only about 40% of eligible voters went to the polls during the most recent midterm election. George G. Nathan, who was an American magazine editor in the mid-1900s, once said, "Bad officials are elected by good citizens who don't vote." Our country cannot be by the people, for the people, if that is only 60% of the people. The more people that take the right to vote for granted, the quicker we could lose the right. In order for our country to be best represented, we need all our citizens to have the right to vote and all our citizens to take advantage of that right. The federal officials that you elect have some of the greatest powers. One of the biggest responsibilities that those federal officials have is deciding if and when our country goes to war. Although they would not have this power if our military was not so great. Enlisting in the military is yet another civic duty and is indubitably one of the greatest things you can do for our country. It all started with the Minutemen. A small militia defeated one of the greatest empires of all time, and once they declared independence, our country started building a more permanent military. Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution allows Congress to create a military and maintain a navy. It also allows Congress to declare war. Our Congress needs to use our militaristic strength for the good of our nation because the men and women that serve our country are some of the most valuable people we have and perform one of the most noble acts you can. Every year, I get new responsibilities. The better I live up to those responsibilities, the better year I have and the more I grow as a person. It is the same with our country. The more our citizens fulfill their responsibilities, the better our country can be and the more we can grow. As our beloved JFK once said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Thank you.
Judges, contestant 4 had a time of 8 minutes, 57 seconds. There was no penalty. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome contestant number 5 to the stage. His oration is titled "The People's Responsibility."
The whole reason the Constitution was written was to make sure the American people would be fairly represented in government and fairly treated in society. The Constitution is for the people and by the people, which is why the first 3 words are "we the people." The Constitution covers everything, from civil rights to human rights to gun rights. It provides us with so many important and essential things, even though many of us take these things for granted. But the Constitution also includes some things that are the job of the American people, not the government, to carry out. These things are known as civic duties. Some examples of civic duties in the Constitution are lawfulness, loyalty to the country, jury duty when called upon, voting, and military service. Most of these responsibilities, besides of course military service, aren't that big of a commitment. Jury duty may take a few hours and can occasionally take a couple of days, but you can only be chosen once a year, and most people are only selected a handful of times during their lives. Voting can take 30 minutes tops, maybe a little bit more, and loyalty and lawfulness are simply rules you should abide by to be a good American citizen. Why is it then that in the 2016 presidential election, just over half the registered voters cast a ballot? And in the midterms this past November, just 47%. Yes, there are obstacles that can make getting to polling stations difficult, but part of the reason for this decreased voter outcome is laziness. A lot of people think, my vote doesn't really count, or this person's going to win anyway. It's a shame that people think this way, as if you truly support a candidate or a topic on the ballot, you should get out and vote for it, no matter how little support it is getting. Even if you don't feel a strong connection with anyone or anything on the ballot, you should still get out and take advantage of the great opportunity that you are given in having the right to vote, as many people still don't have this right. Our country is designed so that everyone can have a voice, which is why there have been 5 amendments created to enable this. The first is the 15th Amendment, which states that no person shall be denied the right to vote based on their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 19th, which gave women the right to vote. The 23rd, which stated that people in the Washington, D.C. area shall not be denied the right to vote in the presidential election. The 24th, which abolished poll tax. And finally, the 26th, which states that no person over the age of 18 years shall be denied the right to vote. Our government not only wants us to get out and vote, but they need us to. The more people that vote means the more diverse choices and a more diverse government. If it was only rich white men that went out and voted, then our government would be a bunch of rich white men that want to help the rich get richer. This is why there have been 5 amendments passed to ensure this doesn't happen, and why it is so important that if you are able, you go to a polling station and cast a ballot. Another civic duty, similar to voting, is jury duty. Both are relatively easy, but also very important to take part in. Juries are mentioned in Article 3 of the Constitution, as well as in the 6th and 7th Amendments. These outline the purpose of juries, their importance, and their powers and limitations. However, jury duty is one of the most frowned upon civic responsibilities. It seems like everyone hates it. I've obviously never been called to partake in a court case, as I am too young, but I often hear adults and even my parents complain when they are selected. A lot of people try to get out of jury duty because they are either afraid to end up on a case that takes a few days, or because they hate it. What these people fail to realize is that as a juror, you're responsible for protecting the life, liberty, and property of not just the people involved in the court case, but also United States citizens. You are also responsible for upholding the values of the Constitution and making sure the people on trial are brought to justice. Thomas Jefferson said, "I consider trial by jury as the only anchor ever yet imagined by man, by which government can be held to the principles of its Constitution." Many people don't realize the importance of serving on a jury. Hence, they try to find a way out of it. They don't realize that juries protect our courts from unfair trials. Without juries, or with biased ones, then our trials could easily be influenced. Let's take a look back at 18th century America, when the British were still in power. Many colonists received unfair punishments for crimes they did not commit because juries were biased towards the King of England. Jury duty is a civic duty. No matter how you feel about it, it is your responsibility as an American citizen to get out and do it if you are called upon. Just think about this. While you're in a courtroom for maybe a few hours in a day, our troops are across the globe making sacrifices that most of us can never even imagine. Military service is by far the biggest commitment as far as civic duties go. It takes a really strong and really dedicated person to join the armed forces. Since our country was founded just 242 short years ago, the military has been one of the main reasons for our great success. However, it would not be possible without the extreme sacrifice of a few noble citizens. According to the Council of Foreign Relations, 1 in every 200 people serves in the military, but this adds up to 2 million people total, with 65%, or 1.3 million, being on active duty. Without these people, our country would not be able to run a military capable of functioning at such a high level. When we don't have enough people to do this, what results is a draft, which we have seen a few times throughout U.S. history, such as both World Wars and the Vietnam War. Sometimes a draft is necessary because there's simply not enough troops to address the magnitude of such a large battle. But sometimes drafts are needed because there are not enough people willing to serve in the military. Take the Vietnam War, for example, where a draft was needed to fill vacancies that people were not willing to. The Vietnam War draft caused many problems, such as draft dodging, the bribing of draft boards, and the mistreatment of lower-class citizens selected in the draft. The draft was then abolished in 1973, around the same time the Vietnam War ended. This is why the sacrifice our troops make to protect the country they love is so important. There are places in the world where people are required to serve at least a few years of military service. There are even places where people younger than me are serving in the military. I am so lucky and grateful that I live in a country that there are enough people willing to make such a big sacrifice to protect this great country. Civic duties matter. People will say that jury duty sucks or that their vote doesn't really count, but they're wrong. That's why they're written in the Constitution, and why there have been numerous amendments passed to better help people carry out their responsibilities. Donna Brazile, the first black woman to head a major political campaign, said, civic education and civic responsibilities should be taught in elementary schools. I actually agree with this. Imagine if we can inspire maybe 10% more of the population to get out and vote, or maybe educate people on the importance of jury duty and serving in the military. Imagine what a difference that can make. Jury duty, voting, and military service are obviously among the most important civic duties as they are mentioned in the Constitution. But there are so many other civic responsibilities not mentioned in the Constitution that are just as important. Our country does so much for us, and they just need us to give a little bit back in order for it to run as well as it does. Thank you.
Okay, judges, contestant number 5 had its time of 8 minutes, 48 seconds. There is no penalty. Once you finish with that gentleman's score, we're going to invite you to go to the green room with the tabulator where we'll tabulate our scores, and then we'll bring out the contestants and give them a whooping round of applause for what they just did, and announce the winners. So at this time, if you need to go to the bathroom or anything like that, you are free to go. We just ask you guys to try to get back here in the next 10 minutes. Just a couple of remarks. The contest is only successful with the assistance of those willing to give up their time to help with this. I would like to publicly thank those individuals who assisted with this contest: the timer, the tabulator, the escorts, and the usher. He's back there. Good news. Okay, at this time I'd also like to recognize our outstanding panel of judges. You had your work cut out for you tonight. Would you please rise and be recognized? All right. We can finally bring him out. So appearing as contestant number 1 is Miss Ivy Hicks. appearing as contestant 2 is Miss Riley Germain. Appearing as contestant 3 is Mr. Michael Romney. And appearing as contestant number 4 is Evan Iskandarian. Got chilly in there, huh? All right, and appearing as contestant number 5 is Mr. Jackson Lang. Okay, so I feel that we should stand and honor these guys. So let's. Okay, so before we announce the first, second, and third place winners, I just want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you guys. It takes a lot of commitment, faith in yourself, and hard work to accomplish what you have done tonight. Win or lose, I know that I'm extremely proud of you. They are as well. And not only for your dedication, but also for being model citizens for the school district, the community of Big Sky, and your student body. So, I thank you, and let's give it to them one more time. All right, so Commander Cousin Allie's going to come out here, and he's going to, Cousin Allie, Cousin Kenny's going to present everybody with their awards. So we're going to start with the participant in the action pin. So first we'd like to bring up Miss Ivy Hicks. All right. Secondly, Miss Riley Germain. All right, and so for their participation tonight, they will receive a certificate and an American Legion and the Sons of American Legion action pin. All right, so now we've all been waiting for the 3 finalists. In third place, and recipient of $200, a bronze pin, an action pin, is Mr. Jackson Lang. All right. In second place, recipient of $300, a pin and another coin, is Mr. Evan Iskandarian. And last but not least, that is our first place winner, recipient of $500, a gold pin, an action coin, and a certificate. Let's hear it for Mr. Michael Romney. Okay. Sorry, forgot it down here. Teachers. I know, right? All right, so one last time, let's give them all a round of applause. I just have a few closing remarks. America's future rests on the success of today's youth. A knowledge of the U.S. Constitution will help prepare today's students to meet the challenges of tomorrow's world. I look upon this occasion as truly an opportunity for these students to begin that journey. Before I bring the competition to a close, I would like to thank the members of the American Legion, Post 99, the Sons of American Legion, Andrew Blessing, who is not in the sound booth anymore, but he's filming it for us, the Big Sky School District, and the Wompat for hosting this event. This concludes our post-level competition of the 83rd American Legion High School Oratorial Contest. Will you please stand for the salute to the colors? That's just over there. Guys, you want to lead us?
And salute. Two.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's our contest. Thank you so much for coming.